Hello, Mobile County, and welcome back to the Primetime Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about leadership, the importance of leadership, and why it's important when these deputies or officers are having their day to day contact with you. Well, thank you for staying tuned, and hopefully today you'll be enlightened a little bit. On the last episode, I talked a lot about why I was running for Mobile County Sheriff, why it's not personal, and why we need change. You don't have politicians too often that's going to come directly to you the way that I'm doing it and try to convince you into voting me in a way that is transparent, truthful, and authentic. I believe that in running for Mobile County Sheriff that it is I that should make a commitment to you and not just solely ask for your vote on May the 19th. And what I'm going to do is just outline really what my plan is going forward. You know, we talked on the front end of this podcast in the opening statement about officers' attitudes. Have you dealt with that much at all in your lifetime? I think most people, in my opinion, they support the blue. They support law enforcement and certainly the job and the task that police officers have to go out in the field and do every day in their efforts to intervene, prevent, and certainly solve crime. But I think most of us would be honest and say, well, the only issues I have with law enforcement is why do they act the way they do on a traffic stop? Why do some of them have attitudes when they're doing their day-to-day jobs or tasks? And I think it's real simple, and we'll certainly go over it. And we'll figure out how to correct that. Certainly me as a leader will have to convince you how we do it. And really the only way I can do it is simply this. And no one's ever done this to you. No one, at least in Mobile County, has ever came directly to you. They've given you their ideas. They told you what they were willing to do or not do. Most of the time, you only know what you see out of a 30, 40, or even a 60-second commercial. That's why the podcast is important. I want you to get to know me, Paul Prine, the man, Paul Prine, the leader, Paul Prine, who can be your sheriff and bring authenticity back to leadership, truthfulness, and certainly transparency. I have dubbed this the contract with Mobile County, and I think it's important, and we're going to go over it a little bit. Listen, leadership that listens to the public. I will personally commit to having monthly leadership meetings with the community in every community from North Mobile County down to South Mobile County. I think it is important. I think that the sheriff needs to go direct with you and to be able to answer your questions about crime, about issues that you're having in your specific community, and educate you on what the law, both criminal and civil, are as it regards to the duties of the sheriff's office. Number two, restore trust and transparency. Most people will tell you they don't trust government. They don't trust government officials. They think every one of us are lying, and certainly have a lot of big distrust for those in law enforcement. It is so important that we work with communities to build trust and transparency, not just in operations or when something bad happens in the community, but certainly on budget matters, things that, you know, the government or the sheriff buys. I think we should be transparent. Now, it's a matter of public record in many regards for a lot of things that are purchased, you know, as a part of conducting the day-to-day operations and the functions. But that transparency in the way of when we buy automobiles, right? Can we buy the same automobile that maybe the sheriff bought for 80, 90, 100,000? Can we buy the same automobile cheaper without having all the bells and whistles and just, you know, frivolous spending with your money, the taxpayers' money? Leadership. I think I have proven that probably more so than anybody in this state. And I don't say that to be arrogant. I say that my leadership is defined by integrity. It's not politics. It's not money or greed. And if we ever need a strong leadership today, people, it is today. Equal treatment of all citizens under the law. Citizens will be treated with dignity, fairness, and respect, and most importantly, compassion. Now, you think about that, compassion. How often are our deputies or our officers going out there enforcing the law, but also doing it with empathy, compassion, and using certainly a lot of discretion? I think it's easy to hold criminals, or certainly those at the lower end of the social economic scale, if you will, that commit crimes, or gangbangers, if you will. It's easy to hold them accountable. But or do we have the type of leadership in Mobile that holds sometimes those that wear the suit accountable? Do we treat them any different than we treat the average everyday citizens out in Mobile who are paying the taxpayers to fund our jobs, to fund the operations of government? And those are things you don't hear many politicians talk, but you're going to hear me talk like that because I believe it. And then, of course, professionalism is managed in the standards of excellence and the core values that I'm going to outline for you today. You're going to see really the standard that I intend to set for the Mobile County Sheriff's Office. And I can assure you, as a part of those standards, the sheriff or the Mobile County deputies will not embarrass you, and that is my commitment to you. As a part of that contract with Mobile County citizens, I've outlined some commitments that I think are important. One is an independent review of officer offender involved death investigations. What that simply means is if an officer loses his life, unfortunately, or even a member of our society, I don't necessarily believe that the law enforcement agency directly involved in those situations should be investigating those cases. I believe those cases are to be turned over to another agency like the state police and have them to come in and investigate and conduct the lawful criminal investigation in an objective manner that's true and transparent, working with the district attorney's office and giving that case ultimately to the DA to resolve that case if there should be any criminal charges, certainly on the officer and or the offender involved, whichever case is pertinent to that particular investigation. That is so important. As the chief of police for the city of Mobile, early in my tenure, I certainly wanted to do that. I think it gives the idea that the agency is being truthful and transparent with the public. And those situations, there's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be activists in the community to say that law enforcement did something inappropriate. And I think that it separates the agency involved from the agency that has no bearing with that particular agency, such as the state police in the case that I'm talking about. I think it would be very prudent, important, and wise to do such a thing. Now, the agency can still conduct a parallel administrative investigation to determine whether or not that officer, if the officer is involved in a situation, if they violated policy, and then we can deal with that as an agency. That's an internal matter. But I think that's important. I believe that shows transparency, and you're not going to hear many police executives talk like that because it's about maintaining control and controlling the idea that if an officer or deputy is wrong, then, we get to clean it up some kind of way. And if we're not doing that, then at least the public sometimes thinks that we are. My commitment to you is no one is above the law, to include the sheriff or those of money, power, and influence. I talked a little bit about that a little while ago, but the truth is there are second classes in our society, not just here in Mobile County, in our society. And somehow or another, when politicians get elected and get seated into office, there's an idea, I think, that what's good for you is not necessarily good for them, and I don't subscribe to that. I believe that the leader should live by example. They should live their life the best they can above reproach. It doesn't mean that they doesn't make mistakes or have personal issues that sometimes get in the way. We're all human. But the truth is that under the law, we should all be treated fairly, irrespective to money, power, and influence. I believe, as a part of my commitment, stronger communities through community policing, that our neighbors and our deputies are both working in tandem together to resolve the issues that create chaos, disorder, and decay in every community. I believe in treating the community with dignity and respect. I don't believe that officers ought to be going out here because they're having a personal bad day and then take that out on you, the unsuspecting public. Budget accountability, I talked a little bit about that with the contract. Answering your calls. I believe that we should answer your call, and we should not leave that call until we have exhausted every resource, every avenue to be able to bring whatever issue is to a close. And then if we're not able to bring it because of the lack of resources, that we should be able to provide you the resources that you need to be able to seek additional help to resolve that issue. Certainly reducing crime, in my opinion, I've done it better than it's been done in many, many years, whether it's chiefs or sheriffs. I don't know that the sheriff's office has ever put out an annual crime report. They should. They're held to the same standard in the law. But somehow or another, I've never, or at least not been able to find any 10-year report, 5-year report, or annual report on the Mobile County Sheriff's race. How do we know whether or not the sheriff's office is really doing what they're supposed to be doing? I've looked on the federal website to try to find those numbers, and I've still have come up short. Maybe I'm not looking in the right place. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, that is a report card. That is a commitment from me, because you, the public, when you vote for me, you need to know, other than what you think I'm doing. Listen, let me say this. Are our leaders doing good? Is the sheriff doing good? Well, how do we know? We have no report card. We have no report. We have no data that tells us what we're doing. There's two parts to dealing or reviewing crime data. It's the data itself, and whether or not that trend is down, up, down, going up, whatever the case is. But the data is going to tell us exactly what's going on as these reports are filed, cases are cleared, whatever the case may be. However, there's also the perception of crime, and that's whether or not the public thinks crime is up or down based on social media posts, based on what the media is portraying to the public. That is the perception. And you can have a really, really great crime rate or a low crime rate, but because of all the social media and the broadcast perception, I actually think that things really aren't good. I mean, you take the city of Mobile. We've done very well. We had a 38-year low in crime. In 2 years as the chief, we reduced the crime some 65% in the category of homicides. While one homicide is too many, we're very proud of that number. The men and women of the police department at every level of that department did exactly what our strategic plan called to do, which is why we were so successful. But now when you compare Mobile's crime rate to Montgomery, Jackson, or Birmingham, to other like cities, you would think, man, there's no crime at all in Mobile. And that's what I mean by the perception of crime. And then, of course, a few years ago we had the article that came out that said that Mobile is the second deadliest or dangerous city in the country, and that just really wasn't true. And that was really a reporting issue between the Mobile Police Department's automated system and the state's automated system. And the state did not reconcile those numbers. They just took whatever numbers our system was sending them, and we never got a notification there was an error, and then said the state reports that to the federal government. Then we find out, oh, Lord, man, we're the second largest or the second most dangerous city in the country, and that just really wasn't true. And fortunately, because of good contacts and relationships with our federal partners, we were able to get those numbers corrected once we determined that was an issue. And that's the true story. But we don't know. Sometimes we may think that whoever the sheriff is, and not just the sheriff we're dealing with now, but whichever sheriff it is, if they sound good on TV in a 20-second sound bite, we think, oh, man, they're really doing good. If they're talking tough on TV about locking criminals up, oh, man, they're really doing good. But how do we really know? We don't have any report, an internal report about the crime or the data, so we really don't know how well the sheriff or the prior sheriffs have been. And I think that's unfortunate. My commitment is we will reduce crime, and we will give you an annual report, or report card, if you will, on the performance not only of the sheriff, but certainly the men and women of the Mobile County Sheriff's Department. And most importantly, transparency of operations and serving you. And I think many times as leaders, and certainly sometimes with the officers at the bottom, with all the political interference that goes on in law enforcement, I think sometimes we just forget what our oath of office is, and that certainly is to serve the people. The standards of excellence is something that over the years I held myself to without even really knowing that I was holding myself to it. But when I became a staff member some 12, 13 years ago, I realized, as I was taking over a command at a precinct level with 70, 80 officers and civilians, that it didn't matter what I thought. It mattered what the officers believed in, what they subscribed to as a way of a mission. And so I started coming up and developing these standards of excellence as a staff member, but attitude. And these things can not are just in law enforcement. These things are with how we approach everyday life. Our attitude is so important. Half of everything we deal with is how we look at a thing, how we feel about a thing, and then how we go about trying to deal with whatever that situation is. Deputies will subscribe to a positive mindset that creates a willingness and enthusiasm towards citizens and colleagues. Personal conflicts will not be tolerated. You say, well, it's kind of an odd statement to put in there, but it's important. In law enforcement, what we find is that sometimes people just don't get along with one another. And then we're not professional enough, mature enough sometimes, and the leaders certainly aren't, to be able to get over their own personal conflicts. And when you can't do that, it creates chaos within the rank and file, certainly within that sphere of influence, right, that span of control. And then what happens is then that officer, if that officer is unable to process, that officer will go out into the field. They're having a bad day. They're dealing with all their personal issues. They come to work, and now they're having a personal conflict with a supervisor. Now they find themselves having a bad attitude, and guess what? You pick the phone up because you're having an issue you can't resolve on your own, and you need a deputy to come out there and resolve that problem for you. And then that deputy shows up with an attitude. Listen, these things are important. We have to check our attitude, check our professionalism, and make sure that when we go out to the public, we're suited, we're armed, and ready to meet the challenge and the need of whatever issue you have that would require our assistance. Appearance. Deputies will be fit, groomed, and representatives of Mobile County. Look, law enforcement is a part of their force continuum without ever saying anything is their appearance. And I heard my daughter say one time, and I have to say it, and I use it now quite frequently, is that when you look good, you feel good. And it plays a role on your mental psyche and your abilities to get out there and do the job, right? Your confidence a lot of times comes from competence, but more importantly, your appearance. And I think it's important that our deputies represent both physically, mentally, in every way they can be, represent you, the people of Mobile County. Competence is a big deal in law enforcement. A lot of times officers, I always say about the first 5 to 7 years, they've learned about what they're going to learn. And we all become victims of complacency, that human nature of just being comfortable. And when a leader comes in and stretches you, it's uncomfortable. And sometimes rather than recognize, hey, this leader's stretching me to be something more than I am, well, the leader's looking at it from a standpoint that, hey, I see more in this lady. I see more in this man in their official capacity as an officer or deputy, and you stretch them. And unfortunately, if we don't teach or mentor or guide some of these younger officers in there, they get complacent and then they stop learning along the way. And that doesn't help you as the voter, because if they can't give you the resources or deal with your situation, we're not very competent in doing the things that we need to do, certainly in that official capacity. And then last but not least, under the standards of excellence, my friends, is service. Deputies will be reminded by their oath of office in serving the community in every way that demonstrates the standards of excellence, which I just gave you, and certainly the core values that we are going to talk about. Listen, I believe in service. I believe that when we get into this line of work, it is a service industry. It doesn't matter what we call it, peace officer, police officer, law enforcement, public safety. It is a service industry, and I believe that a lot of times leaders lose their way when they climb the rank, and it becomes more about self-serving and them benefiting from whatever office they got, whether it's monetary, whether it's political benefits that come with it, whatever the case may be, and I think we lose our way. I've learned a long time ago that when I started my career as a young officer, as a police officer, most of the 25, 30-year-old law enforcement officers were very grumpy, snippety. They didn't have any patience. A lot of them were very wise, but they were hard to deal with. As I worked my way up through the rank and file, and now I'm that 30-year veteran, I never found myself with that. The I call it a stinking attitude. And now when I look back, if I were to be true with you, the voter, I were to reflect back and say, you know, it wasn't the job really that made officers grumpy, and the job can make you grumpy. It wasn't the job that turned officers callous, and the job can make you callous. The reality of it is there's a problem in law enforcement, not just here locally, but it's nationwide. And there's two types of leaders. There's leaders that divide and conquer. And listen, that's a real strategy, my friend. And most of the time, we use it when we're dealing with foreign countries. We use it as a matter of a war tactic or strategy. My opinion is we don't use war strategies and tactics on a civilian police force. The second part of that leadership is the one I subscribe to, and it's unity. But that is the one that most leaders fear the most. Because when people come together, not only can you accomplish great things with ordinary people, but you also scare those leaders that are nefarious, that are self-serving, and those leaders that rule by having a control of every aspect of that organization. And that won't be accepted with me as the Mobile County Sheriff, I'm just going to tell you. I believe in unity. I believe in people coming together. Yes, we're going to have personnel issues. Yes, there's going to be times when we're just not going to be able to fix your problem out in the community because it may just require expertise or civil litigation or things that maybe only a lawyer is going to be able to resolve in the way of crime. And so I'm just coming to you and I'm just telling you that I understand the bigger issues with leadership, problems within the rank and file, officers having their own issues, and how we guide and mentor them. And last but not least, as a part of my standards, is what I dub as the core values that the Sheriff's Office will lead by. Listen, every agency has a set of core values. But when you deal with those officers or deputies, do you see the core values implemented or manifesting itself in a way with that deputy while they're performing their job? A lot of times you don't. And that's because if the leader is not following the standards of the core values, you can rest assured the rank and file is not going to do it either. The core values that will be set if I'm the Mobile County Sheriff are simple. Character. Deputies will be equipped with the physical, mental, and moral characteristics necessary representing Mobile County citizens. Character and integrity are probably the two most important attributes that a leader can have, not just an elected official, not a political appointed official, but the youngest, the lowest officer on that department by proxy of wearing that uniform and badge and taking that oath is a leader. And we'll expect them to hold these same standards. Integrity. Deputies will be honest and have a high degree of moral discipline, setting the standard as a model citizen. Listen, officers are not perfect. They're human just like you and are. They're going to make mistakes just like we will, just like you will as an average citizen of Mobile County. But it's a matter of making real mistakes as a matter of the heart or as a matter of the mind. In other words, was it incidental or was it intentional? As the chief of police, I got accused of being authoritarian because I made it very known in annual in-service training with all my officers. We can deal with you violating the policy if it's not chronic and, you know, the situation is the policy being broken was incidental. In other words, I did it. I didn't know what the policy was. We can deal with that. We can get you training. If the policy violation was intentional, you know, it depends on whether there are circumstances involved that mitigates it or aggravates the entire circumstance, and that's a case-by-case basis. But I made it very clear to every single officer of the Mobile Police Department that if your actions in the field were criminal, unlawful, or malicious, you would have no friend with the chief of police or in the chief's office. I don't understand what leader above the chief of police would not want the chief of police telling the men and women or the rank and file, we will not tolerate misconduct from you that are malicious and intentful or harmful to the public. I don't understand that, but nonetheless, you can rest assured we will live and work by integrity. Certainly, the third thing is honesty. Deputies will be honest in the performance of their duties. that they are entrusted with as gatekeepers of the law. Well, why does that need to be in there? We expect, listen, we expect our officers to be honest, and we take them at face value. But there's a law, without getting into it, where an officer perjures themselves, they can be giglioed. And what that means is that an officer caught lying, misrepresenting the truth, omitting the truth in many regards, can be giglioed by the state and or federal courts, or both. And if they are, then they essentially lose their ability to practice policing, because the courts will refuse or not allow them to make cases or bring cases before the court, and that's very problematic. Well, there's a reason for that, and there's a reason because instinctively, a lot of times people lie, and there are various reasons why people will be caught on the hook lying. I don't necessarily understand it, because it's hard sometimes to tell the truth, even when you've done something wrong or when you hadn't done something or you're being accused. But at the end of the day, we have to learn to work through those processes, and that's where character and integrity matter. And you can rest assured that I will not only hold myself as the Mobile County Sheriff accountable to these core values, but the Sheriff's Department as well. And then, of course, service. Deputies will provide impeccable service with every contact to ensure successful outcomes. And know that was not a typo. That's an overlap from the standards of excellence, that officers and deputies will not lose the sight of serving you, the public. That is so important to me, because without you, we shouldn't have a job. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are the core values. Those are the things that I'm bringing to the table, and I hope that you can resonate with them. And while a lot of agencies have these core values, we don't necessarily see them demonstrated, and mainly because there's no real mentorship within those departments or agencies, no guidance from the leaders. And let me tell you another reason, just real quick, if I may. You would think, the Mobile Police Department, 500-man operation. And you would think that, by the time you've made it, after 20 years or so, you've made it to staff. That's about, somewhere between, 17, 18 years and up, you make it to staff if you're smart, competent, and you're trying to do the right things. But when you have to tell commanders and leaders of a large or any organization, but a large organization, if you have to tell them that your duty hours are 8 to 5, if that's the duty hours, and that they're not allowed to come in at 9:30 and leave an hour and a half early every single day, or take 2-hour gym times when they only get an hour for lunch, a lot of them will look at it as, well, that's executive privilege, but there's nowhere in the rule book that says you get executive privilege. So that lends me to myself about leadership, right? So there's two types of people that get ahead in law enforcement. And I've worked with two different agencies, and certainly I think it's across the board. There's two types of people that get promoted or that get ahead in law enforcement agencies. And the first one is going to be the smallest populated group of commanders, and those are going to be those officers, men or women, that work based off merit. They believe that they're dedicated to the cause. They believe in their oath that they took whenever they took it, and they believe that, I came here to do a job, and I want to do it the best it's ever been done, and I want to leave this place and I want to leave this community better than when I got that community or that organization. And those are the smallest, because in government work, those are the people a lot of times that don't deviate from the rule book. They don't subscribe to the office politics. Some of you may say butt kissing, and I'll just use that. I know it's very blunt, but I'll use that. And that leads me to the second part of those that get promoted, which is the larger populated commanders or leaders in government work. In government work, it's the most inefficient, ineffective organization on the planet. And so that second group of people, which is the largest group of people that get promoted in these organizations, do it by butt-kissing, brown-nosing, playing the office politics. But invariably, they always abdicate their official responsibilities if they're asked to do something illegal, if they're asked to compromise their oath of office, their own personal ethics or morality. They play the political game, and then so their bosses usually will get them promoted or find a way to get them favored and influenced, so they work their way up through the rank, and in doing so, these leaders know that if I promote this person, it's because of blind loyalty. And unfortunately, and I'm sure this goes on in every organization, but I would think in the private sector, if you're not producing, if you're not performing, you're probably not going to be very successful at that organization. Unlike government, all you have to do is just be loyal to a fault, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, and then you get promoted. And so that is the status quo. That is the people that have learned to manipulate and work through the system. Now, you're going to say, well, Brian, that's what everybody has to do to get ahead. You have to figure out what you got to do. No, I do not subscribe to that. The reality of it is my position is it doesn't matter what the outcome is. The means is never justified if it's unethical, unlawful, or even criminal. And what that means is the means is the roadway or the path that gets you to the outcome. I don't subscribe to that. And I was very fortunate, certainly with my mindset, to move up the rank and file, and I always call it the favor of the good Lord. And, of course, you see where it got me, right, at the end of it, by holding to principles and standing firm, which is what leadership really is. Leadership is nothing more but doing the right thing even when it's unpopular. Let me tell you this, leadership is easy as long as you're going to the public event, you sit at the head table, and you get your name recognized. And, man, people love to have their name recognized, let me just tell you. But the truth is when, in law enforcement certainly, when the hard times come, when the activists come, when the pressure in the back rooms come, and you're being asked to compromise your integrity, you're being asked to twist or manipulate circumstances so that it favors the politician or it favors you if you sit in that seat, that's pressure. And ultimately pressure, when it's applied, is the catalyst that reveals or manifests what that real leader is. And I would argue in government work we have very few leaders, whether it's public officials, appointees, or even elected officials. Now, this is hard, deep talk. I get it. A lot of the politicians are not going to like it, and that's fine. It's good. I said in my commercial during the mayor's campaign, I'll never be accepted in that group because I always believe in doing right by you. I'm going to always tell you what you need to hear about a situation, not what I think you need to hear. I will always be truthful wherever I can be truthful because that's what leaders are supposed to do. So as we move forward, I'll talk to you a little bit about leadership, and those things really are important. And if most police officers would be honest with you, if you know them, and I'm sure a lot of you do know them, they're going to tell you, yes, leadership is so important. Law enforcement agencies across the spectrum or paramilitary organizations. But in order to move people, all leadership is really is influence and doing the right thing. It's not big titles. I've seen people with big titles, and I've been behind the room where they lie, they manipulate, and they do whatever's best for them or the people they serve under. We see it every day in the federal government. Absolutely we do. But I've also seen officers at the lowest end of an agency and organization that had more influence than the people at the highest titles of that organization. They had more influence with the rank and file, the men and women that would follow them. And that's all influence is, or leadership is just really influence. Hey, follow me. There's a better way over here. And so as I say that, you can understand that it really does matter who's driving that ship. Because if that leadership is strong, if that leadership is relentless and committed, rest assured the rank and file will be relentless and committed. But if that leadership is corrupt, if it's toxic, it's just like a fruit. You take a bad apple and you put it in a batch of apples, over a day or two, it starts rubbing off on all these other apples. And so it's important to understand leadership is so important, and that's why this podcast is important. That's why I can come directly to you. I'm not depending on the media. They're complicit in a lot of the problems in every community, and I'm not depending on them. I'm coming directly to you. And I think that's important because you're not going to find many politicians to be able to do that. Because once they get in office, as I told you in the intro video last week, they realize where the money, power, and influence is coming from. And that money, power, and influence dictates how they act, what they do, how they vote, what they say, because they don't want to upset the balance. If I only serve one term, it will be the best term you've ever had in this county, I can assure you. Let's talk a little bit about my experience. Right now, there's only 2 people in the Mobile County Sheriff's race. I mean, it's still early. You know, there may be other people that get into it. But as of right now, as a matter of fact, when I make this video today, let's talk about experience between myself and the current sheriff. And this isn't disparage. I've made a commitment a long time ago that I don't disparage people, not going to disparage anybody. If I was that type of person, I probably had a right to do it with the former mayor and some of those on his staff, and you didn't see me do that. But I'll always be factual in the way of a record, right? In that, you know, leaders have records. I had a record as a chief of police, 65% reduction in homicides, 17.5% reduction in all crimes, and we'll talk about that one day on another episode. But that 17.5% in 2023 was the single largest year reduction of all crime in the city of Mobile since 1988. And, of course, 48% reduction in attrition, because we need the men and women at every organization to be able to carry the load and work and reduce crime. You can't do it without them. So let me talk a little bit about my experience, and I think this will kind of clear up a little bit if you think, well, some people may say, well, I think the current sheriff is doing really, really good. How do we know? It's like I talked with you earlier about my commitments and certainly my contract with you. How do we know? I haven't found an annual crime report that shows the data whether or not our sheriff's office is doing really well. So it may be a perception because we judge a person based on whether we like their mannerisms or we like what they're saying on TV, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're doing a good job. Let's look at the White House in Washington, D.C. It's kind of an example, maybe an extreme example, but it comes to mind. The outside is beautiful. The paint is beautiful. The decor is great. The lawn is manicured. But it depends on who's in that office behind the doors as to whether or not they're doing a good job. Now, that's a political example, and I get it. That's very subjective, because if you like one guy over another or a lady, it's not going to really matter. If you like me, it's not going to really matter if the current sheriff is doing a really good job or not, right? You just like me, and I'm going with that guy. But hopefully this podcast over the next several months will give you an idea of the kind of leader that I am, the transparency and the authenticity that I'm bringing to you in hopes of earning your vote. There's not many politicians that's going to do this, because as I do this, I am setting the standard. As I do this, I'm going to say things that allow you to hold me accountable in 4 years if I don't do the things that I said I was going to do, or if I start wavering from that. So while we're not going to disparage, I'm just going to go through some of these and just talk about my experience and why I think it matters. 30 years of law enforcement, executive and administrative experience, and why that's important and that separates me from any candidate that's going to get in this race, right, is because the Mobile Police Department, I always say, is the big show. The city of Mobile Police Department is the big show in town. From New Orleans to Jacksonville to Montgomery, everything rides and falls on the city of Mobile and certainly the Mobile Police Department. The Mobile Police Department is an urban agency. It comes with a lot of urban problems and things that the sheriff's office simply does not have to deal with. So therefore, the sheriff and maybe some even the deputies, not that it's a bad thing, it's just the nature of the sheriff's office versus the city of Mobile, which is the big show in town. That executive and administrative experience is vast, and it's far and beyond that of the sheriff's department. Our current sheriff's a great guy. I know he's, as far as being an investigator is concerned, I don't know about his personal life, but a great guy in terms of being a really, really good investigator. I've known him for a long time, and he seems to be a great investigator, but he was an investigator as a captain, and that's not to disparage him or say anything. That is just the function of how the sheriff's office works. But as a captain of the Mobile Police Department, you're going to start your career off more than likely as a commander in one of the 5 precincts. And 4 of those 5 precincts are equipped with a chain of command of about 70 officers or not more, including civilians. But that may not seem like a big deal, but 4 of those 5 precincts that I referred to are within the top 2%. I believe it's the top. No, I take that back. It may be the top 11% of all the cities and towns in the state of Alabama. So if you were to take, say, the 2nd precinct, it is equivalent to one of the top 10% cities, just that precinct, in this entire state. So a precinct captain in the city of Mobile of 500 sworn officers is equivalent to being a chief 90% of the cities or towns in this country. They're dealing with a budget. They're dealing with monitoring overtime. They're dealing with personnel issues, discipline, handing out discipline to officers, dealing with administrative issues. And that is not the case at the Sheriff's Department. Now, again, I'm not saying that to disparage or belittle anybody in the Sheriff's Department. They are apples and oranges. But as a product of growing up in the Mobile Police Department was 27 years, I earned and got that executive and that administrative experience that is superior to that of the Sheriff's Department. So I'm bringing that expertise and I'm bringing that knowledge to the Sheriff's Office that otherwise, the current administration of the Sheriff's Office simply just don't have. Crisis and disaster management. The Sheriff's Office doesn't have to deal with the crisis or the disaster management and coordinating agencies and trying to resolve problems that come with such big disasters as hurricanes. That is a big deal when you have to deploy the amount of assets and resources out into a disaster zone to be able to coordinate logistically and deal and give reports to even your superiors about some of the things that you're having to do to move that operation along to get the city up and running. And again, that's not to disparage those at the county. It doesn't fall within their function. Now, they may have some functions out in the outer regions of the county area, but to put it in perspective, the county, the Sheriff's Office is approximately a third of the size of the Mobile Police Department. Now, I'm not talking about the jail. I'm not talking about some of these other things. I'm just talking about strictly the law enforcement component is about a third of the size. The Mobile Police Department roughly has about 500 sworn officers. I believe there's somewhere around 170, 190 deputies that make up the Sheriff's Department. So these experiences that I'm giving you is I'm just trying to outline and explain to you why the experience is different and how my experience, in my opinion, with all humility, is simply that it is superior to that of what we have now at the Sheriff's Office. Certainly, I have the experience in budget preparation and oversight for 3 fiscal years as the Chief of Police, more than a $70 million a year budget. All 3 years returning money back to the coffers of the city of Mobile, understanding that we still reduce crime, and we did it better than it's ever been done in the city of Mobile, at least since 1988. And I'm not bragging about it. It may sound like that I am, but really it's kind of hard to convey this information to you without it look like that I am. But I just want you to understand, I don't know particular the specific budget for the Sheriff's Office, but I do know that if we have to continue going back to the legislators to get more money because we keep blowing the budget, and yet we still don't know what you're doing with the operations or with the money, we're not being a very good steward of the people's money. And to me, that's very important. It's probably one of the most important aside from reducing crime. Short and long-term strategy planning. The Mobile Police Department roughly has more than 500 cars. And in order to move those cars on a 5 to 7 year rotation, you've got to buy 50 to 60, 70 cars a year to be able to rotate those cars out by the time they get 140, 150,000 miles. And you may say, well, 150,000 miles ain't a car. I just bought a car with 150,000 miles, if you say. But 150,000 miles on a patrol car that runs all day, 12 hours a day, from here to there, stopping and going in traffic, pursuit driving when necessary. Those are some beat up cars, and the cars, what good are they if the operation is inefficient and not effective because cars are constantly staying in the shop? I do know that the sheriff's office has a lot of cars, 8, 9, 10 years old, with nearly 200,000 miles on them. And while I don't know the inside operation, I do know that apparently there's no strategic plan in rotating that equipment out. Now, let me say this, people. I have to tell you this. Cops will work invariably for low pay because most of them feel like it's a calling in their life to do it. Certainly I did. I don't understand that sometimes, but if you do or you are in the occupation, you'll understand that. But one thing they're not going to do is they're not going to work and live in a toxic environment. They're not going to work, live, and play, excuse me, if they don't have the necessary equipment to get the job done. They will leave that agency with 10 years on the table for $1 an hour or more. That's just the nature of cops. They're alpha males and females. And so it's important that our leaders know how to strategize, certainly short and long-term strategies with the budget. Major crimes, I've done criminal investigations, homicide investigations, sex crime investigations, assaults. I worked over 10 years in narcotic investigations at various capacities, sergeant, lieutenant, captain. A lot of those are complex investigations. I've been in charge of one time when we had a Mobile County Street Enforcement Narcotics team, and it was a state task force with multiple agencies in it, and I used to be the commander of that organization, working also for HIDA, which is an acronym for Federal Drug Program, and we were very successful at it. With this experience, obviously, I'm bringing evidence-based crime reduction strategies. I put forth a great strategy with the Mobile Police Department. A lot of chiefs will put strategies together. More recently, 2 chiefs removed. There was a strategy, but there was a lot of budget items that were in there. And one thing I can assure you is that there has never been strategy training at the Mobile Police Department. And what that means is that sometimes these chiefs will put together a strategic plan, and part of it will include crime reduction. But what good is a strategy if you're not teaching it to the men and women? I have personally taught the strategy of the Mobile Police Department to every single man and woman at in-service training with the Mobile Police Department, and that's one of the reasons why we were so successful. And as a part of that strategy is dealing with the internal culture, trying to turn things around. Certainly, we're dealing with leadership, fairness, equity, and transparency amongst the rank and file, which is a big deal, and certainly discipline and communication are a big deal. And so I brought evidence-based crime reduction strategies, but here's the thing. I'm not patting myself on the back. It was just a great plan of years of preparation for the job. What I had to do was be able to buy the men and women or the rank and file of the police department to be able to buy into that program and say, man, that's a great program. Let's work on this program in the capacity that I'm in at this agency. And that's how we were able to do it. And that's why that we have an evidence-based attrition reduction strategy, and that's why we reduced attrition over 2.5 years, 48%. It's the men and women that carry that organization. It's not the chief. It's not the sheriff. It's just a plan that's put place, a vehicle that's put place, and then you have to get the personnel to buy into it. Any CEO at any major organization or corporation will tell you that your biggest asset is certainly your employees, and I don't think in law enforcement government work, for varied reasons that we talked about earlier, I don't think that a lot of the divide and conquer strategy really works in law enforcement, because the very men and women that we don't treat very well, it ends up affecting them when they go home at night at the dinner table. Now, you think about that, how your boss treats you and the things that that happen at work becomes such a problem that officer takes that problem home, and then they're short with the children, they're irritable with the wife, and then it creates problems at home only because of political interference at work or the leader not holding the rank and file accountable to the same standard across the board. Of course, policy review and implementation as a part of the CALIA National Standards of Policy Implementation. We were audited every 3 years. We had a kind of a skeleton audit in every year, a paper audit, if you will, about whether or not we were complying with our policies, and those things are a very, very big deal. The Sheriff's Office is not accredited with any agency that I'm sure of, and those agencies really just give us credibility. That means that we are not setting the standard for ourselves, that we're using the best management practices out there in the field to be able to guide and lead and mentor our officers in doing the right thing. Regardless of what Kenyon Brown said about me, we follow the rules. We do what we're supposed to do, and no chief or no staff member unilaterally just sets these policies because they think it's a good policy to do. Those are vetted through the legal advisor, which happens to be an attorney. And so there's a lot of practices of best management behind the scenes that I think that could be done better at the Sheriff's Office, and I certainly have the credentials to do it. Operational control of more than 700 personnel to include civilians. That's a big deal because you have multiple layers of supervision. You don't have that at the Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff's Office may have 2, maybe 3 captains over there as an example of a staff member, but those staff members work in whatever assignments they are. If they're in criminal investigations, if they're in civil, they don't necessarily get to the executive and administrative level or experience that you would get with 10 or 12 captains at the Mobile Police Department, or 5 executive staff members. It's just again, it's not to slight the Sheriff's Office. It's just that by proxy of the job, they just don't necessarily have that type of experience that doesn't come with the Sheriff's Department. Of course, I talked with you a little bit about budget oversight and operations, how I was able to manage over a $70 million budget, 3 years, returning money back to the coffers for the city of Mobile. That's being a good steward of your money and not just frivolous spending. If we needed the money, we would find a way to, keep the money and certainly buy equipment if we need it. But at the end of the day, I think a leader has to be a good steward of the people's money and try to cut costs everywhere they can. And by the way, that's one of the core tenets of being a conservative or being a Republican. And I don't even know if most Republicans live by that standard anymore, which is fiscal responsibility and accountability. And I plan to bring that back to your office. And, of course, the formal education in the way of a master's degree in criminal justice and an undergraduate degree in business administration. I know I said a lot, but those education disciplines are invariably the 2 most important disciplines that you could have in law enforcement. One, dealing with the budget, understanding the principles of finance and certainly money. And then, of course, criminal justice, understanding the background of criminal justice, where we're going, and what's proper and what's not proper in that way without belaboring that scenario. And so I just think those things are important. I talked a lot about leadership. I think leadership is so important. Without good, strong leadership, we're destined to fail. But we don't know that we're failing because we have no report card. We have no standards that says, hey, this is how well we're doing. Now, I'm sure after hearing this podcast, maybe there will be a crime report that will come out from the Sheriff's Office. But how do we trust it at this point? We should never have to ask for it. It should have already been out. It should have been out for years. But it hadn't been out because even the media doesn't ask. The City of Mobile puts out an annual report. They also have a 10-year average report that puts out. But nobody ever thought to say, hey, well, let me go with some of these other agencies and just simply find out, what their crime stats are. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but I think the media needs to play a more significant role in trying to share really what that transparency should look like to you and not what they think is best for them or whatever's best for the coffers of those respective media broadcast companies. But anyway, thank you so much. I know that was a lot of information for you, but I just really wanted you to understand the contract that I'm proposing, the proposition that I have for you as Mobile County citizens and voters of your sheriff's office. It does not belong to the sheriff. It does not belong to the deputies. That office belongs to you, and you need to be able to see the work that's being done and how that work affects you in your daily lives every day within this county. And while they are responsible for the crime and certainly the county, the sheriff's office could probably do a better job, not just helping one or two agencies around here, but trying to find a way to put money back, stop the frivolous spending and help some of these smaller agencies that have manpower shortages or does not have the money that maybe the city of Mobile has or even the county has in the way of allocating for public safety issues. But my friends, thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in. And as always, at Prime Time Podcast on YouTube, Prime for Sheriff on Instagram and Facebook, I'm asking you to follow, like, subscribe. Also share the content. We would like this platform to grow. And if we're successful and fortunate in obtaining the Mobile County Sheriff's Office, my idea would also is to continue a weekly podcast to bring all the pressing issues to you so you don't necessarily have to go looking for whatever the issues are or the problems are with the Sheriff's Office. Again, authenticity, real leadership, transparency, and accountability is what I'm asking you to vote for May 19th, 2026. If you have any ideas about what you want on the podcast or what you want to address, you could go to primeforsheriff@gmail.com. You can send a question, a topic. Certainly leave it below in some of the comments. We'll be glad to try to get it here on the program. And again, my hope is in the near future is to simply go live and be able to go direct with you and answer your questions on air that maybe some of the other citizens may also have. As always, remember, Paul Prine is mission first, accountability, trust, and transparency. Love you. We'll talk with you later. See you soon.